Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now today, not whizzing around in front of me, are the Quar Fidwogs, which sounds bizarre, from this Quar's War. Now these are the plastic kit from Wargames Atlantic, and I have to admit I was a little surprised when they sent them along to me, because I wasn't sure about the Quar. A few of you have asked in the past whether or not I'm going to paint any for the channel, and I said at the time, nah, they don't really do it for me. Then this box showed up, and I spent the weekend absolutely devouring the Quar lore and the rules and what have you. I got to admit, I'm a convert. I love these hopelessly pathetic little anteater guys. I think they're great, and I'm going to have a lot of fun painting them. So these aren't spinning because trying to keep all three in shot would be murderous, but luckily painting them's nice and simple. All of the paints will be listed in the description below, along with the basing method, so let's get clipping. So once you've got your miniatures assembled, first thing to do is to go ahead and prime them. Now I've used here ash grey from the Army Painter for a very simple reason. I couldn't find my Dragon Red primer spray. If you can, then go ahead and use Dragon Red instead. Ash grey though is going to work as a pretty good middle ground because all of the colours that we will paint will go just fine over this as well. I'd recommend using something medium to light, so like a grey up towards a white. If you start from black, some of the brighter colours that you might want to use for the Quar skin are going to be a little bit more tricky to paint on. So you'll see I've got a couple of infantrymen, and I have got the operator for the tractor, just blue tack to a base himself so that I can paint him at the same time and pluck that hair off his helmet. So to nobody's great surprise, we are going to start with Dragon Red. You can use quite a large brush to apply this, and you'll see it covers relatively well over the grey, but you will get a little bit of that primer still showing through. It's just the nature of some of these lighter colours. So once this first one's gone on nice and solid, let it dry for a few minutes, and then we'll apply a second. Now you don't need to deliberately go over boots and equipment and all what have you, but it won't matter if you do, so you don't need to be terribly fussy applying this base coat. That's pretty messy, but that's exactly what we want. Nice solid red. Make sure that you are giving it a second coat, otherwise you're going to get a slight greenish pallor as the grey of the primer shows through, so you don't want that. Now what I've got in my hand here is one of my ratty old makeup brushes. These are brilliant for dry brushing. And on some kitchen towel here, just a tiny bit of legendary red. I'm going to dab just a little into my bristles and really work it in. It's important that you're not leaving much behind on this at all. What we're going to do is add a little bit of depth and texture to the uniforms because there's not a huge amount of surface detail on these guys. And I want there to be a bit of texture, just a little bit more visual interest going on there. So I'm almost stippling. You see I'm sort of poking and then dragging my brush down to accentuate some of the detail like the pockets and what have you. Even on flat areas like his arms, build up a little bit of color there. You can go as crazy with this as you like, but try not to overdo it or you'll end up turning them orange. And we end up with a color that's almost like a tomato. If you remember like early Blood Angels, that tomato red, it's kind of what we want. It is going to dull down as we paint over it later though. What I've got here, this is warped yellow, and I'm going to carefully paint in his hands and his little snooter with this. This is a neat opportunity to grab some of the colors that you don't ordinarily use and use them as the skin tone. So on this fella I'm using yellow. On the other two I'm going to use Turquoise, Siren and Leafy green. I'll make sure those are in the description. Now that will take a couple of coats, maybe 3 if you are using quite a bright color, but keep the faith. Now I want to show you that I did actually make a mistake while I was doing this myself. I didn't wait for one layer of paint to dry before trying to apply another over the top. And what happens is the wet paint that you're applying will kind of reactivate the paint that's underneath and it lifts it up. And what you'll have is the little chunks of paint that have dried, they end up giving you a funky texture. So what you end up with is a slightly surface texture where it should be smooth. Not all that visible on camera, but I know it's there and it's going to bug me. So make sure that you are following my good advice and let each layer dry before you paint over the top of it. Now speaking of, I have here Arctic Gem, and with this we're going to paint on the trim of these First Army guys. Apparently the First Army is led by a royal member of the Fidwog family, so they have a blue trim on their uniforms. Take your time with this. I'm trying to make sure which bits are trim and which bits are actually his webbing, so just a little bit of paint on your brush at a time. Keep a nice point there. And if you make any mistakes, you sort of splurge over the sides a little. Don't worry too much, because you can very easily go back with your dragon red and tidy up the edges. Now I won't lie, there's a bit of that to do. It can be quite fussy. I've also done the rain cover on the helmets, as that's mentioned, and the roll on his pack in the same color. Now what I have is leather brown, and I'm going to paint the cover on the barrels of their weapons with this. As well, I'm going to paint in the strap around the helmet relatively carefully. And now on the artwork, there is a black strap on the outside, but I think it's going to be easiest just to paint the whole thing in leather brown now, and then do the black over the top. Now with the pack, the main pack always seems to be brown from what I've seen, but I have seen people painting these straps around this pack in black. I'm going to paint them brown as well. Same too with these ones. For the black leather details, what I'm going to use is Ironclad Grey. Now, this is a new color. This one's coming in the John Blanche Masterclass sets from the Army Painter. But they have also said that these are going to be available individually. So if you don't want to get the whole box, don't worry. There will come a time you can get these as single pots. Now, same as with the blue trim, take your time with this one. And any mistakes you can fix up with a little bit of that red. I'm pretty certain this is going to be the last of the base coats, and I would recommend, because I'm going to use here gunmetal for all of the metallic stuff, if you would prefer a finish a little bit lighter, more like the box art, use plate mail metal instead. Me, I do want a slightly darker finish. Remember as well, any little bits on their pouches or on their packs that you need to paint in. And yeah, should be almost ready for a shade. Alright, now once you're satisfied, it's time to go ahead and shade your miniatures. Now I would always recommend, most shades and washes, they come thicker than they need to be, same as paints do. So what I've done is mix down some strong tone with some speed paint medium. Half and half is fine. Then whack yourself out a big old brush, and we're going to cover the entire fella in this mix. Really make sure that you're getting it into all the nooks and crannies. Now, as you're working with it, particularly on large flat areas like his uniform here, if you get any big clumps that pool up down the bottom, just give them a couple of seconds to settle, and then you can drag them away with your brush and apply that wash somewhere else. So I am going to go over the entire miniature of all three fellas, and then we'll let them dry for about half an hour, somewhere nice and warm. Let's see what we get. Now at last, once he's dried, we've got plenty of depth, and he's looking pretty cool. I'm quite happy with that. There's nothing saying you couldn't just varnish him up, pop his base on him, and chuck him on the table like that, but let's take it a little further, because I'm quite enjoying painting him. Now the Quar tend to have these little sort of dappled sections on their noses, and I see people painting them as quite prominent spots. But the artwork, what I'm going to try and do here is with a little bit of hardened leather on my brush. It might be a bit much actually, just get some of that off. With some hardened leather, I'm going to lightly splotch in sort of a little dappled section, so I'm not too worried if my coverage isn't perfect or if the speed paint does collect in odd ways. It's going to look almost like a bruise at first. And once that has dried, and it will dry quite quickly, I've got here some space dust. And I'm going to use this to dot in just a couple of spots and make those little lighter patches that you see folks doing. Now this, you want to try and keep as random as you can. And I'm going to put the colors that I use for the other two guys in the description, same as here. But I will paint those fellas off camera. Now I think that's a blend of kind of like the artwork in that it's a very simple dappled sort of pattern, but the way that everyone seems to paint them with the spots as well. I quite like how that looks. Don't let me tell you how to paint your funky little anteater guys though, you can do it how you like. Now what I'm going to turn to is some deep grey, and I'm not going to highlight every black edge, just the parts where it's going to be pretty prominent. So along the edges of their pouches, just a couple of bits along the edges of their straps. But for example, don't bother painting, the entire strip around his waist. Just a couple of little slashes here and there will be enough to add that sense of depth. Then, because the blue on his uniform is quite prominent, what I'm going to do is grab some bright sapphire. And same as with the black, don't painstakingly highlight every edge. Just pick a few, where a couple of little scratches are going to give you loads more definition. So pick your battles here. And just a little bit of this in the right places will help this uniform pop. I got a little bit ahead of myself here, and I went back to some legendary red from earlier. Now this is our dry brush color, and I'm only going to do it on this one fella so that you can see what the difference would be. I've just added in a little bit to some of the creases. This is really, I would say I would skip it on your sort of bulk infantry, but if you've got any officers or what have you that you really want to look a little bit tidier, or just have a nicer uniform, just a little bit of this here and there to brighten this up. If you wanted to, you could grab a lighter silver and start highlighting some of the metalwork stuff, but I think there's a law of diminishing returns. Same too with the packs, maybe a little bit of, command khaki or something if you wanted to highlight those edges, but pick your battles. What I'm going to do with these fellas now is to take them outside. I'm going to hit them with a spray from the Color Forge matte varnish, and then I'm going to go ahead and pop their bases on them. The recipes for that will be in the description. Now while that dries, we can go ahead and get started on the tractor. Now this is going to be a great deal easier, and you'll see straight away I have primed it differently. This here is leather brown. It's not really a strict reason that you would have to. I would recommend if you're not going to use brown then to use black instead. I'm using brown because it's going to give us an interesting grimy recess, anywhere that I might miss with some paint. What we're going to do is to start off by overbrushing the whole miniature though. Now we're going to stick to gunmetal for this, and overbrushing is very similar to dry brushing, except you don't take as much paint off your brush. So using a big old rough brush, does not matter what size it is, just the bigger the better and faster this will be. You see I'm really just smashing this over the brown. You don't need to worry, areas that are going to be painted red later, you can smack a little bit of this on, it won't matter too much. But concentrate on the parts that are going to be metallic, and away we go. Now that will take literally just a couple of seconds with a big enough brush. Now the painted example on the box is the same color as the uniforms, and I want to change mine up a little bit, so I'm using Wyvern Fury as the base color for the red here. Now just while I'm painting this, you'll see it goes on very, very quickly over the red. I found it easiest to start by assembling the hull section, because it's quite a boxy superstructure. Then glue that into one side of the track sections. You can then glue the support struts into place, and then finish by popping the next track section into place to lock it all together. Now this won't take terribly long, and of course everything that I'm doing to the hull I will also do to the turret. Once that second coat is dried, we're going to go ahead and start painting on the markings. Now here I've got royal blue. We're going to do this now because if I make any mistakes, it's very easy just to grab that Wyvern red, or Wyvern Fury rather, and cover it up. So let's start by trying to draw a box, using the edges of the hull as guidelines. And once I'm satisfied it looks relatively straight, we can start filling it in. When you're satisfied with that shape, grab yourself some matte white, and we're going to start by painting in the outside of that box. So this is, again, a little bit of paint on your brush at a time. Don't want to overload it. And just drag as straight as you can. Oh gosh, I'm going to need to tidy that up. Now it doesn't matter if you overshoot the edges slightly, and you will probably find it easier to do that and get a nice straight finish. And we'll also paint in the number 1 at the same time. Now before we do any tidy up there, grab some fresh warped yellow, and we'll spin around this side and start by painting in the F.O.D sigil. So I want a slight, let's just blob it in like that. We can tidy that up as we go. And that little almost paw shape over the top. Now I've used some royal blue to tidy up that one. I've probably overdone that slightly. But we'll also use a little bit of Wyvern Fury now to tidy up this funky little shape. And we can essentially use this to delete, the excess yellow there. So let's start little sweeping motions to keep the shape mostly intact. And flipping it upside down will make it easier to get a nice straight finish to the upright bits. Now, after some interminable fussing, what I'd also recommend is that you use that same blue to paint in the lens on the front. We're just going to base coat that for now. Then we're going to mix up and shade again with our half and half, strong tone, and speed paint medium mix. Now this is going to look pretty rancid first going on, but guide it towards the edges. Keep your brush moving in the same direction as much as possible, and the same holds true. Once it has settled for a couple of seconds, you can shift it away with a damp brush if you need to. So, the whole miniature, here we go. You will get some tide marks, like you'll see along the bottom of these panels here, but I'm honestly not too fussed. It does make it look a little more organic compared to what I had in mind. What I am going to do is grab a scuffed up bit of old packing foam, just fold that over in my fingers until I've got, there we go, a little nubbin in the end there that I can use. And I'm going to dip that into a little bit of Banshee brown. Any dark brown will work. Then we're going to use this to just lightly dab along the edges, any areas that you want, your tank to look as though it's caught a bit of dinging. Oop, that might be a little bit much, but not to worry. We'll go ahead and just knock about. On the edge here is an easier place to spot this. So this big flat panel, if I just knock it a couple of times, the rough edge of the foam gives us a random chipping pattern. Now because this is where the crewman's going to climb up, I'm going to dab a little bit more, representing him climbing up. But yeah, make sure to do this over the turret as well, and don't skimp when you come near the markings, because it'll look a little funny if you try and avoid anywhere in particular. Once you're happy with that, you can pop the turret on, get a look at what the whole thing's going to look like. What I'm going to do is pop them down for a second, get one of my raggedy old brushes and some plate mail metal. What we're going to do, you guessed it, is dry brush all the metal work. So concentrating on the edges in particular, just a little bit of this will very quickly brighten up those edges. And once you've worked most of this off your brush, what you can do is sneaky, just pick a couple of areas and buff the edge of those chips with a little bit of extra color to make them stand out. Don't go crazy with it, but it will work very effectively. Now remember here our Arctic gem that we painted on the uniform? What we'll do is get some fresh one of that, and we're going to paint kind of a half moon shape on the bottom of this here lens. Now we'll do something similar with some bright sapphire, painting just slightly less of it right into the bottom, like so, as long as it comes off my brush. There we go. And then, the easiest part, just a tiny dot of white, both the bottom here, boop, and the opposite side, boop. Now I'm going to quickly hit the whole thing with the same matte varnish that I did the troops. And once that has dried, we pop some gloss varnish over the lens and let that dry. Now let's pop everything together and get a look at our complete little mob that we've painted today. And so, there at last, our Fidwog are complete. I get such a kick out of these guys. This was a lot of fun. Now, the tractor is probably a little bit darker and maybe more sinister and beaten up than you would probably expect from a Quar tank. Look at what I normally paint. I didn't want to go full on cartoon finish, and I thought it would be interesting to kind of set against the rather bright look of the Quar themselves. Of course, there's all manner of ways that you could do it, and I think you'd have a lot of fun giving it a shot. So thank you again to Wargames Atlantic, first of all for sending along the miniatures, and secondly for challenging my preconceptions that I knew I didn't like these guys. No, I've certainly come around. These are a lot of fun. Thanks as well go to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for all your time today, folks. It's been a long one. You all enjoy the rest of your day.